The sun had just begun its descent over the Texas plains, casting long shadows across the dusty streets of the small town of Calhoun Ridge. The heat of the day lingered in the air, clinging to the wooden buildings and the worn boardwalks. The town seemed quiet, almost too quiet, as if holding its breath for something it could not yet name. At the far end of the main street, the rattling of a wooden sign swung in the wind announced the arrival of a new figure, a woman whose presence would soon disrupt the fragile balance of the town. Helena Ward stepped lightly onto the boardwalk, her leather boots kicking up tiny clouds of dust with each deliberate step. She wore a simple olive-green jacket over faded jeans, her dark hair tied back in a practical braid that swung slightly as she moved. To a casual observer, she might have appeared as a traveler passing through, another soul wandering into town seeking a drink or a room for the night. But beneath the calm, measured movements, there was a precision born of years in special forces, a constant awareness of her surroundings, a mental checklist running silently in the back of her mind. Every shadow, every sound, every subtle movement told a story, and Helena listened. The saloon stood at the corner of the street, its wooden facade worn with age, swinging doors creaking as if impatiently waiting for someone to enter. A thin haze of smoke drifted from the chimney, mingling with the dust in the air. Helena adjusted the strap of the bag slung across her shoulder and pushed the doors open with practiced ease. Inside, the murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the low notes of a piano created a backdrop of controlled chaos. Patrons glanced up briefly, nodding the newcomer, but returned to their drinks and games of cards. Helena did not seek attention. She never did. She slid into a corner booth, her movements smooth and unassuming. From this vantage point, she could see the entire room, the bartender polishing glasses, the two Marines at a nearby table arguing quietly over some trivial insult, and most importantly, the group of ex-military men seated at the back. They were talking in low tones, occasionally nodding and exchanging small, meaningful gestures. Helena recognized some of the signals, patterns of behavior she had learned to read over years of operations. She knew immediately that this was no ordinary gathering. These men were likely the key to the weapons route she had been tasked with investigating. Her hand brushed lightly over the edge of her bag, where a notebook lay hidden beneath a fold of cloth. She would not reach for it unless necessary. Observation was her priority. For now, she needed to blend to appear as harmless as any other stranger walking through Calhoun Ridge. Her heart rate remained steady, her posture relaxed yet ready. She had trained for moments like these, where a single wrong move could compromise an entire operation. Helena Ward was not just a visitor. She was a hunter, gathering pieces of a puzzle that, if pieced together correctly, would prevent weapons from reaching dangerous hands. The saloon's door swung open again, and in stumbled Corporal Briggs. Helena had already taken note of him, the way his shoulders slumped with fatigue, the hint of arrogance that clung to him, the way his gaze swept the room like a man surveying territory he believed he owned. He was clearly intoxicated, though not enough to render him completely oblivious. His eyes landed on Helena, and a slow grin spread across his face. Perhaps he thought he had found an easy target for amusement, or perhaps he simply did not recognize the danger he had stumbled into. Without warning, Briggs shoved Helena aside as he made his way to the bar. The movement was crude, fueled by both alcohol and bravado. Helena barely moved, letting the push carry some of her weight before she stabilized herself. It was not painful, but it was jarring enough to draw the attention of every patron in the room. Conversation stuttered and paused, eyes darted toward the scene. Yet Helena did not shout, did not recoil. She only steadied herself, offering a calm, almost apologetic glance at Briggs as if it were her fault for being in the way. Shove, unintentional as it might have seemed, served a purpose Helena had not sought but welcomed. The group in the back stiffened, their heads turning in her direction. Their murmured conversation halted mid-sentence. She had been noticed, and in that recognition lay both danger and opportunity. Helena's sharp eyes tracked the subtle changes in posture, the minute shifts in facial expression. One man tapped a finger against the table rhythmically, a signal masked as a nervous tic, but a signal nonetheless. Helena filed it away, silently analyzing the potential implications. Two other Marines approached Briggs, presumably to prevent further disturbance. Helena could feel their gaze, condescending in nature, as if she were fragile and required protection. She remained calm, carefully maintaining the illusion of vulnerability. Her outward demeanor masked the finely tuned awareness of a soldier trained to read behavior, assess risk, and act decisively when necessary. Every movement in the room, every twitch of a muscle, every hushed word became a data point in the intelligence she was gathering. She was patient. She knew the value of patience in moments like these. The saloon owner, an older man with a lined face and wary eyes, noticed Helena's presence with a mix of curiosity and concern. He leaned over the bar slightly, muttering under his breath as he passed by her booth. Helena caught fragments of his words, warnings meant for her ears alone. The group in the back was not to be trifled with. She noted this quietly, the information sinking into her plan. Every detail mattered, from the way the floorboards creaked underfoot to the subtle glance exchanged across the room. Helena sipped her drink slowly, her senses extending beyond the saloon walls. She knew the importance of observation in these first hours of infiltration. Every patron, every movement, and every whispered conversation was a clue. Even the push from Briggs, which might have seemed like a minor annoyance to an outsider, became a pivotal moment in her assessment. It revealed patterns, vulnerabilities, and the readiness of others to underestimate her. Helena smiled slightly to herself, invisible to everyone else, aware that a storm was quietly brewing, and she was at its center. Corporal Briggs staggered toward the bar, his boots thudding loudly against the worn wooden floor. His elbow caught the edge of Helena's booth as he passed, sending her slightly off balance. The force wasn't dangerous, but it was enough to draw a sudden hush over the room. Patrons paused mid-sentence, glasses clinking against tables, the piano keys momentarily ignored. All eyes flicked toward the commotion. Helena's calm posture contrasted sharply with Briggs' sloppy aggression. She steadied herself effortlessly, leaning against the booth's edge with a serene air that only made the scene more dramatic. Briggs didn't notice. He barked a loud, slurred greeting to the bartender, demanding whiskey with a flourish that bordered on theatrical. His actions, fueled by alcohol and unchecked ego, were careless, but Helena knew this was a rare gift. Often, operatives had to force attention to reveal behavior, but here it had happened naturally. She didn't react in anger. She didn't flare her eyes or tighten her jaw. She allowed the push to happen, her body absorbing it like water flowing around a stone. But in her mind, every detail of the shove, every angle of contact was logged and analyzed. Helena's attention immediately shifted to the group of men in the back, their heads turning subtly in response. The shove had confirmed what she had suspected. They were watching. Their posture stiffened, subtle hand gestures emerging that betrayed familiarity with military signals. One tapped his fingers against the table in a rhythm Helena recognized, a hidden code meant to communicate silently across the room. She filed it away quietly, recognizing its significance. Whoever they were trained, disciplined, and aware of subtle environmental changes. The push had drawn her into their awareness, exactly where she needed to be. Two other Marines moved toward Briggs, one steadying his friend while the other gave Helena a glance that was part concern, part condescension. "You okay, miss?" the taller one asked, a hand hovering near her shoulder as if ready to intervene. Helena tilted her head, maintaining a small, polite smile. "I'm fine," she said, her voice calm and measured, betraying none of the alertness inside. Her eyes swept quickly, taking in the Marines' uniforms, their movements, the nuances of their body language. She noted rank, approximate age, training habits, even the tiny twitch of one man's right eye whenever he lied or concealed emotion. Each detail was a thread in the web she was silently weaving. Briggs, however, was oblivious to her scrutiny. He continued to belch and boast loudly, recounting exaggerated tales of military heroics, his voice rising over the subdued murmur of the saloon. Patrons avoided his gaze, some smirking, others rolling their eyes. But Helena noticed how the men in the back reacted. They leaned slightly forward, small shifts of weight and head indicating readiness, almost imperceptible to anyone else. She realized that her presence alone had altered the dynamic in the room. The push had acted as a catalyst, drawing everyone into a subtle game of attention, threat, and observation. Helena's mind worked quickly. She adjusted her seating, angling herself to observe the room while remaining outwardly relaxed. She took a slow sip of her water, allowing the liquid to settle her nerves while simultaneously giving herself a fraction of a second to assess. One of the ex-military men rose slightly, moving closer to the bar in what appeared to be a casual stretch. Helena caught the glint of a knife sheath at his hip, barely visible, and noted the insignia embroidered faintly on his jacket, a patch she recognized from her intelligence reports. These were not civilians. These were operatives, potentially dangerous, and possibly connected to the weapons network she had been sent to investigate. Briggs' next move almost triggered disaster. He leaned heavily against the booth, too close to Helena, and gestured broadly toward the bar. His arm brushed hers again, this time more deliberately. Patrons flinched slightly, sensing the tension rising like a taut wire in the air. Helena's patience held. She resisted the urge to retaliate or expose herself. Timing was everything. One false move could blow her cover and compromise weeks of preparation. Instead, she shifted her weight gracefully, redirecting the energy, making it appear accidental while reading every micro-expression in the room. The saloon owner, an older man with a thin mustache and wary eyes, muttered under his breath as he passed behind her. "Careful, miss," he said, his voice low and barely audible. "Those men, they don't like strangers poking around." Helena didn't flinch. She offered a faint nod of acknowledgement, her mind already cataloging the warning. She had expected resistance. This was part of the game. Her presence in the saloon was a disturbance, but disturbances revealed behavior. They revealed secrets. And secrets were what she was hunting. Briggs, meanwhile, had attracted more attention than he realized. Patrons whispered, and a few nearby Marines exchanged quiet glances. Helena noted how the dynamics of the room had shifted. The powerful attention of a drunken, oblivious man now collided with the alert eyes of trained operatives. She allowed her gaze to linger briefly on the group in the back, noticing their subtle tactical adjustments. Feet planted firmly, hands hovering near concealed weapons, heads slightly tilted as if reading her body language. The shove had been small, yet it created ripples across the entire room, altering the equilibrium in ways she could exploit. She made a mental note. The push was no longer an annoyance. It was an opportunity. Helena would use it to position herself strategically, to observe without being noticed, to gather intelligence while the focus remained on the chaotic Marine. Her fingers lightly traced the rim of her glass, her breathing controlled, every sense attuned to movement and sound. The saloon's atmosphere thickened with anticipation, though no one outside the ex-military circle would have guessed it. And Helena knew that in moments like these, control was more important than confrontation. The night stretched on, each moment layered with tension. Briggs finally ordered another drink, his attention momentarily diverted, giving Helena the chance to catalog new details. The orientation of exits, the sequence of signals between the men at the back, the subtle glances exchanged over cards and drinks. Each clue was a potential key, each movement a confirmation or contradiction of her intelligence. She remained silent, invisible to all but the trained eyes of those watching. The push had been the spark, but Helena was the fire, quiet, controlled, and ready to act when the time came. By the time Helena left the booth to adjust her position closer to the back, the saloon had settled into a tense rhythm. Patrons returned to their drinks, conversations resumed in muted tones, and the piano played softly again. But beneath the ordinary veneer, a battle of attention, control, and observation was unfolding. And Helena, calm and collected, stood at the center, fully aware that the shove by a careless Marine had set the stage for what could become the most dangerous night of her career. The tension in the saloon had shifted subtly, like the slow turning of a key in a lock. Helena Ward remained seated, her posture relaxed, yet every muscle was poised for action. The push from Corporal Briggs had set off a chain reaction she could feel in her bones. Patrons whispered under their breath, glancing nervously at the corners where she sat. Some thought the disturbance was over, but Helena knew better. The room had changed. The attention of those trained to notice such things had turned toward her. Two other Marines approached Briggs, one resting a steadying hand on his shoulder while the other cast a protective glance at Helena. "You okay, miss?" the taller Marine asked, his tone a mixture of concern and something more patronizing. Helena inclined her head slightly, a serene smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I'm fine," she said softly, her voice measured, unassuming. To anyone listening, it sounded like a polite acknowledgement, nothing more. Yet beneath the calm exterior, she catalogued everything. The Marine's stance, the subtle shifts in their weight, the micro-expressions that betrayed both judgment and insecurity. Briggs, still oblivious, swayed slightly, muttering about past heroic exploits no one wanted to hear. Helena noticed how the men in the back stiffened the moment his voice carried across the room. One of them tapped his fingers against the table again, rhythmically, a signal she instantly recognized. They were communicating silently, signaling each other about her presence. The code was subtle, meant to avoid drawing attention, but Helena's trained eyes picked it up effortlessly. She logged the gesture in her mind, mentally tracing the potential connections between the men and their broader operation. The saloon's energy was charged, like the calm before a lightning strike. Helena shifted slightly, angling her body so she could observe without seeming obvious. Every movement of the ex-military men was noted, the placement of their hands near concealed weapons, the slight shifts in their posture that indicated readiness, the way they scanned the room without appearing to. To any casual observer, they were just men relaxing after a long day, but Helena knew better. Every detail mattered. Every small gesture could reveal intent, hierarchy, or weakness. Briggs, unaware of the silent game unfolding around him, leaned dangerously close to her booth again. Helena's patience was tested, but she remained composed. Her fingers brushed lightly along the edge of the table, tracing patterns that helped her focus. She had learned early in her career that calm was a weapon. React too quickly and the mission was jeopardized. Hesitate too long and opportunity could slip away. She needed to maintain her cover, observe the group, and let them underestimate her. That was where true advantage lay. The taller Marine, still hovering nearby, shifted his gaze from Helena to the men in the back. Helena noticed the tension in his shoulders, the slight narrowing of his eyes. He misread her entirely. To him, she was fragile, in need of protection, incapable of handling herself. The irony was almost poetic. The same ego that fueled Briggs' push now blinded this Marine to the truth of who Helena really was. Her training told her to exploit perception. By maintaining the illusion of weakness, she could observe, maneuver, and prepare for decisive action. One of the men from the back stood suddenly, walking toward the bar with a casual gait that belied alertness. Helena's eyes followed him, noting the subtle glint of a knife sheath at his hip, partially obscured by the folds of his jacket. She catalogued insignias and badges, mental snapshots that she would later cross-reference with her intel. The man's movements were deliberate, yet measured, a dance of awareness designed to maintain composure while communicating threat. Helena had to tread carefully. Any overt action could compromise everything. As the man reached the bar, he glanced briefly in Helena's direction. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and she caught the flicker of recognition, or perhaps curiosity. He did not approach, but the subtle signal to his companions was unmistakable. Helena filed it away, knowing this night was about to escalate. Her senses sharpened, scanning every exit, every shadow, every person who could interfere. Her cover demanded subtlety, patience, and precision. The slightest misstep could turn a carefully orchestrated observation into a dangerous confrontation. Briggs, still oblivious, muttered something about all these women thinking they can handle themselves, before stumbling backward into a chair. Helena allowed a faint sigh, as if slightly exasperated, and returned her attention to the group. The room had settled into a tense rhythm. The piano's soft notes, murmurs of conversation, and the occasional clink of glasses provided background noise, but beneath it, a silent war of observation was taking place. Helena's mind raced through probabilities, exit strategies, and potential outcomes. Every decision now mattered. The saloon owner, who had been observing Helena discreetly from behind the bar, muttered something under his breath, barely audible. "They don't like strangers here, especially not women." Helena caught the warning and nodded imperceptibly. She knew the stakes. These men were dangerous, experienced, and unpredictable. The shove from Briggs had placed her in the spotlight, but she had turned it into an opportunity. Every second spent in the saloon added to her understanding of the group's hierarchy, routines, and potential weaknesses. Observation, patience, and restraint, these were her tools. Helena slowly sipped her water, allowing herself a fraction of a moment to breathe, to calculate. Her eyes scanned the room again. The Marine's protective stance, Briggs' oblivious swagger, the ex-soldiers' subtle signals, and the positioning of their bodies relative to exits and potential threats. Each piece of information layered over the next, forming a map in her mind. She was mentally plotting contingencies, escape routes, and opportunities to gather intelligence without revealing her true identity. Helena Ward was more than calm. She was the eye of a storm gathering around her. Minutes passed, stretching into an almost unbearable tension. Helena remained seated, seemingly passive, yet fully aware of every movement, every glance, every murmur. The push from Briggs had started it all, but now, as the room adapted to her presence, she could manipulate attention, extract information, and prepare for the moment she would act decisively. The saloon had become a chessboard, and every player, including herself, had made their opening moves. Helena was ready for the next phase of the game, where patience, timing, and skill would determine who controlled the room, and who left it alive. The saloon's wooden floorboards creaked under Helena's subtle movements as she adjusted her position, carefully keeping herself in the shadows while observing the men she suspected were orchestrating the weapon's route. Her gaze flicked to the bartender, who gave a subtle nod of acknowledgement, almost imperceptible, a silent warning that he trusted she understood the stakes. She did. The air inside the saloon felt heavier now, laden with expectation, suspicion, and a silent tension only perceptive eyes could read. The saloon owner, a wiry man named Gus with deep lines etched into his face from years in the Texas sun, leaned slightly over the bar as he passed her table. His voice was low, careful, almost a whisper. "Miss, watch yourself. Them men don't take kindly to strangers poking around." Helena's eyes met his briefly, giving a slight nod, an unspoken acknowledgement of the warning. She didn't flinch. Warnings were useful, fear was not. She had been trained to operate under far worse conditions, and the subtle tension in the saloon told her that tonight would require every ounce of patience, discipline, and strategic thinking she possessed. A figure at the back of the saloon, one of the ex-military men, suddenly rose. His movements were deliberate, smooth, and quiet, a predator aware of his surroundings. He slipped toward the back door, the dim light catching the edge of a concealed weapon at his hip. Helena didn't hesitate. She waited a heartbeat, then moved with equal precision, following him silently, using the cover of the saloon's shadows and the noise of the bar to mask her approach. Every step was calculated, every footfall muffled against the worn wooden floor. Her mind catalogued possible escape routes, the positioning of allies and threats, and the likely reaction of the men if they realized she was tailing them. Outside, the night air hit her like a sudden wave. The town of Calhoun Ridge was eerily quiet, the streets bathed in pale moonlight. The hum of insects and the occasional creak of a weathered sign were the only sounds beyond the distant bark of a dog. Helena kept her distance, remaining hidden behind barrels and shadows as she followed the man toward a narrow alley leading behind the row of buildings lining the main street. Her breath was steady, her senses heightened. The ex-military man was cautious, but unaware he was being followed. Helena had trained for years to move like this, silent, precise, and invisible. She caught snippets of the man's low conversation, muffled by the night air but audible enough to extract meaning. "Shipment arrives this week. 6 crates, west side, nothing must leak." Helena's mind raced. Confirmation. The intelligence she had been sent to gather was real, tangible, and actionable. Her mission was progressing, but the danger escalated with every step. If she revealed herself too early, the entire operation could unravel. Every word, every breath, every motion had to be calculated. As she adjusted her position to hear more, a sudden movement caught her attention. Corporal Briggs had staggered out the front door, probably searching for his friends or simply continuing his evening of intoxicated bravado. His shadow fell across her path, threatening to reveal her presence. Helena froze, calculating the angle of light, the potential line of sight. Slowly, she lowered herself behind a barrel, letting him pass, invisible in plain sight. Every second she remained unnoticed increased the intelligence she could gather. Patience was a weapon. The man she followed turned sharply into a smaller courtyard behind a boarded-up warehouse. Helena's eyes immediately scanned for danger. The crates they had discussed were likely nearby. Her heart rate increased, not from fear but from focused anticipation. The moonlight glinted off a metal edge in the corner of the courtyard, a partial glimpse of a weapon crate, carefully stacked and labeled. The quiet of the night amplified every movement, every creak of wood, every soft murmur. Helena cataloged it all, memorizing locations, labeling suspects, and noting the possible routes for extraction. Suddenly the man looked over his shoulder. Helena froze, holding her breath. He didn't see her, but he adjusted his path slightly, and she noted it, a small change, almost imperceptible but telling of their awareness and vigilance. She kept moving, silent as a shadow, following just beyond the perimeter of visibility. Her training allowed her to move like this for hours if needed, a predator of information and precision, weaving herself into the environment while remaining undetected. She crouched behind a stack of crates and listened as more voices joined the conversation. 2 more men had arrived, confirming shipment schedules, routes, and contingencies. Every word was vital. East side backup, checkpoints in place, nothing leaves without clearance. Helena's pulse remained steady. She recorded the details mentally, storing coordinates, movement patterns, and potential security weaknesses. A single misstep now could alert them to her presence, but Helena's patience and training allowed her to remain calm, fully aware of the stakes. The ex-military men moved closer together, their voices lowering, almost conspiratorial, as if they knew someone might be watching. Helena's instincts screamed caution. She adjusted slightly, crouching lower, moving behind a larger stack of crates. Her senses extended, taking in every detail, the texture of the crates, the spacing of the men, the shadows on the ground. Each small piece of information became a thread in the tapestry she was weaving, the intelligence that could dismantle a dangerous operation. Then a sudden sound, metal scraping lightly against concrete, made her pause. One of the men reached for a crate to adjust its position. Helena recognized the gesture. They were organizing, preparing for transport. Her mind worked quickly, predicting routes, timing, and potential obstacles. Every second counted. If she acted too early, she risked exposure. Too late, and the shipment could move beyond reach. She weighed her options with surgical precision, her training guiding every choice. Minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by the whispered coordination of the men. Helena's awareness expanded to include the environment beyond the courtyard, the streets, the alleys, potential witnesses, even the distant sound of dogs barking in the night. She mapped every possible variable, ready to act, ready to move, ready to protect the mission. The warning from the saloon owner earlier now resonated in her mind. These men did not tolerate interference lightly. One wrong move could trigger violence, and she had to be ready. Helena exhaled slowly, allowing herself a fraction of a moment to assess. She was close enough to gather the intel she needed, distant enough to remain undetected and fully aware of the surrounding dangers. The shipment information, the coordination between the men, the patterns of movement, They were all pieces of a puzzle that she now held the key to solving. Tonight was only the beginning. The shove inside the saloon had set this sequence in motion, and she had followed it to its most critical point. As the men finally dispersed, returning to the shadows of the town with the precise coordination of experienced operatives, Helena remained hidden, noting the direction of movement, the methods of concealment, and the points where they were most vulnerable. She had the evidence she needed. The intelligence was solid, actionable, and dangerous. She had remained undetected, observed, analyzed, and survived a night full of risk. And yet, she knew the most critical moment was still ahead. The mission was far from over. Helena remained crouched behind the stacked crates, her breath measured, every nerve alert. The ex-military men were beginning to disperse, discussing routes and shipments in low tones that carried just enough for her trained ears. She had collected everything she needed: shipment schedules, directions, contingencies. But the mission was far from complete. The night air held a tense stillness, as if the town itself were holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Suddenly, a shadow moved across the courtyard. It wasn't one of the men she was tracking. Her head snapped up, eyes immediately locking on Corporal Briggs. The Marine, oblivious to her earlier surveillance, had somehow followed her outside. His boots scuffed the dirt, clumsy and loud, and he stumbled near the edge of her hiding spot. He muttered something incomprehensible, his words thick with intoxication. Helena's instincts screamed caution. One careless move from him could blow her cover, and possibly alert the ex-military men, still nearby, to her presence. Briggs, drunk and unaware, reached toward her arm, his grip rough and uncontrolled. Helena felt the force, and her body reacted instantly, as it had been trained to do. She rotated her wrist in a precise motion, pulling Briggs off balance and twisting just enough to leverage his momentum. He hit the wooden wall of the warehouse with a dull thud, landing in a heap on the ground. The motion was fluid, controlled, non-lethal, but the effect was immediate. Briggs froze, staring up at her in shock, his eyes wide. The raw power, precision, and speed of her response were undeniable. At the doorway of the warehouse, two of the ex-military men paused, their heads turning sharply. They had been retreating after the initial observation, but Helena's swift, efficient handling of Briggs stopped them in their tracks. One muttered under his breath, barely audible but unmistakable, "That's trained." Recognition flickered across their faces. Helena, maintaining her calm demeanor, crouched low, hands relaxed yet ready. She did not need to escalate. The demonstration of skill alone had conveyed the message. Briggs groaned, attempting to stand, but Helena was already guiding him to his feet with a gentle, controlled pressure. "Careful," she said softly, her voice calm, almost apologetic, though every word was deliberate. Her expression suggested courtesy and restraint, masking the lethal competence beneath the surface. "Don't try that again." Her eyes, however, remained sharp, assessing the two men watching from the doorway. The message was clear. She was not someone to push, underestimate, or test. The first ex-military man stepped forward, pretending casual confidence, but Helena could read the tension in his posture. His eyes flickered to her hands, noting the subtle strength, the control over Briggs, the absence of panic. Every instinct screamed caution, yet he forced a smile, masking awareness of his misjudgment. Helena allowed the gesture, her body language relaxed, seemingly at ease. Yet the mental gears in her mind were spinning. She catalogued each micro-expression, each adjustment of stance, each subtle signal of communication between the two men. Briggs finally recovered enough to straighten his posture, rubbing his elbow as if the pain alone explained the encounter. Helena's focus, however, remained on the men in the doorway. She had anticipated potential interference, and now her instincts confirmed that the threat was shifting. One of the ex-military men leaned casually against the wall, though his weight was clearly shifted to maintain balance and readiness for sudden movement. Helena noted the subtle cues: fingers hovering near concealed weapons, feet positioned for quick escape or attack. These were men trained for combat, yet the way they now studied her revealed hesitation. She allowed a faint smile to curve her lips, as if amused by Briggs' ignorance. "You okay?" she asked him softly, her tone gentle, disarming. It was a masterstroke of psychology. Briggs was humiliated, confused, but too drunk to fight back effectively. At the same time, the ex-military men were forced to reassess. She was clearly not an ordinary civilian, and her movements had just proven it beyond doubt. Recognition sparked in their eyes, the kind that only comes when someone realizes they have misjudged their opponent entirely. Helena didn't need to speak further. Her actions, controlled yet lethal in efficiency, were enough. One of the men whispered something to his companion, their voices low but urgent, almost panicked. "She's not who we thought," one muttered. Helena's expression remained neutral, but inside, her pulse quickened just enough to maintain focus. Every detail she had observed inside the saloon, every subtle signal, every movement outside had led to this moment. She had maintained cover while simultaneously revealing just enough competence to assert authority, without escalating unnecessarily. Briggs finally slumped back slightly, realizing that his earlier shove had inadvertently unleashed someone far beyond his comprehension. His arrogance dissolved, replaced by awe and a touch of fear. Helena released her grip entirely but maintained her calm posture. She did not need to threaten further. The demonstration alone had sufficed. Her training dictated that restraint could often be more powerful than aggression, and she had executed it flawlessly. The ex-military men exchanged quick glances, the silent calculation in their eyes betraying their concern. They had underestimated her. Every move, every subtle gesture, every seemingly polite interaction was a signal of skill and intent they had not anticipated. One of them subtly adjusted his hand near a concealed weapon, but Helena noted it instantly. She shifted her stance just slightly, a silent readiness, letting them know she was aware, fully prepared, and not to be provoked. The tension hung in the air, thick as the dust of the Texas plains. Briggs muttered something incoherent under his breath, still attempting to regain composure, while Helena's eyes scanned the doorway, analyzing the ex-military men's next likely moves. Their hesitation was brief. They were trained, efficient, and dangerous, but they now knew they had miscalculated. Helena's calm had tipped the balance of awareness entirely in her favor. Finally, the first man straightened, attempting to mask his unease. We didn't know," he said carefully, voice low, almost respectful. Helena maintained her expression, letting the words sink in. Misjudgment had consequences. Observation, patience, and skill had given her the upper hand. She could have escalated, but restraint spoke volumes. The men turned slightly, signaling to each other, quietly reassessing their approach. Helena remained poised, every sense alert, ready to move if the situation demanded it. Briggs, now fully aware of the disparity in skill, muttered a half-hearted apology, rubbing his arm and looking both embarrassed and awestruck. Helena gave a small nod, acknowledging him without condescension. She had neutralized immediate danger without unnecessary violence. Yet the night's work was far from over. The intelligence she had gathered outside the saloon remained critical, and the ex-military men's awareness of her capabilities would now influence their every move. She had made herself known, but only enough to maintain control. Helena exhaled silently, letting her tension ease slightly, though her mind remained sharp. She had handled Briggs and asserted her presence, sending a clear signal to the ex-military men. She was not to be underestimated. Every micro-expression, every tactical observation, every subtle adjustment had been cataloged and stored for later action. The night was far from over, but Helena Ward had proven, in one decisive motion, that she was a force to be reckoned with. The night air had cooled slightly, carrying the faint scent of dust and smoke from the saloon's chimneys. Helena remained in the shadows, her senses hyper-aware as the ex-military men regrouped behind the warehouse. They moved cautiously, exchanging quick, low whispers that betrayed their uncertainty. Helena had already taken mental notes of the shipment route, the timing, and the men's coordination. But now, a single overlooked detail threatened to change everything. She had been careful, meticulous, concealing every identifying mark under her sleeves and jacket. But the law of the physical world and the unpredictability of others had created an opening. One of the men, a taller figure with sharp, calculating eyes, caught a glimpse of her wrist as she adjusted her jacket. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it revealed a small tattoo, a discreet insignia of a classified Special Forces unit. Helena had hoped it would remain hidden, a detail only for those who knew what to look for. The taller man froze mid-step. His eyes widened, a flicker of recognition passing across his face. He muttered something under his breath, barely audible but unmistakable. "She's one of them." The words carried a weight that immediately altered the tension in the group. The other men followed his gaze, their expressions shifting from casual confidence to sudden alarm. Helena's presence, once merely a curiosity, now carried the unmistakable aura of danger. They realized that she was no ordinary civilian, no random observer. They had underestimated someone far beyond their expectations. Helena noted the shift instantly. Every muscle, every subtle gesture in their bodies, broadcasted sudden fear and reevaluation. They began whispering frantically, exchanging coded signals and gestures that were no longer casual but urgent. The shipment schedules, contingencies, and meticulous planning they had discussed moments earlier now became secondary to the immediate threat standing before them. Helena, aware of the advantage this recognition gave her, adjusted her stance slightly, the calm predator poised just beyond reach. Briggs, still lingering nearby and attempting to regain composure from his earlier humiliation, had no idea of the gravity of the revelation. He watched, bewildered, as the group of men who had once seemed confident and in control now shifted in unmistakable panic. His mouth opened as if to comment, but Helena's eyes met his briefly. A subtle gesture, calm, collected, was enough to silence him. He backed off, finally grasping, at least partially, that he had encountered someone far beyond his comprehension. The ex-military men moved as one, glancing toward the shadows and exits, trying to calculate their next step. Helena allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Their panic was a tool she could use. Every instinct screamed caution, yet opportunity gleamed like a blade. The tattoo, once hidden, had changed the game entirely. The men were now forced to consider not just her presence, but her lethal capability, her training, and the consequences of further interference. One man stepped forward slightly, trying to maintain composure, but his eyes betrayed him. They darted to her wrist, back to her face, and then to the crates of weapons nearby. He whispered something urgent to his companion, and the second man's expression hardened. "We underestimated her," he muttered, his voice low, clipped. "We need to move now." Helena had anticipated this response. Their fear, combined with the need to protect their operation, created a narrow window for action. Helena moved silently, positioning herself between the men and the crates. Her stance was calm yet commanding. The night had shifted. She was no longer merely an observer. Every step she took, every subtle shift of weight, was calculated to maintain control while signaling that she was ready for immediate confrontation. The taller man made a move toward the crates, but Helena's quiet but assertive presence halted him. They were no longer in control. She had taken command of the situation, without raising her voice. Briggs, finally realizing the severity, muttered incoherently. His earlier bravado dissolved into awe and fear. He had brushed her casually, shoved her, and now understood the magnitude of his misjudgment. Helena's controlled reaction to him had been a mere hint of what she was capable of. The men, recognizing the same skill she had demonstrated with Briggs, now faced the reality that they had no idea whom they were dealing with. Panic rippled through them, subtle but undeniable. The ex-military men began retreating toward the warehouse doors, muttering coded signals, attempting to regroup and maintain operational security. Helena's gaze followed every movement. She noted the direction of their steps, their positions relative to the crates, and the gaps in their coordination. Every action was a clue, every hesitation an advantage. She had moved beyond observation. Now she had leverage. Their fear, triggered by the simple revelation of her tattoo, had shifted the balance entirely in her favor. One man, seemingly the leader, glanced back at her. His eyes were wide, calculating, and something resembling respect flickered through his panic. "We underestimated her," he repeated, almost like a mantra. The words confirmed her assessment. Her cover may be partially blown, but her identity had elevated the operation to a new level of control. She could dictate the next steps, manipulate the remaining seconds, and ensure the mission remained secure. Helena exhaled slowly, keeping her body relaxed, her mind sharp. She remained poised, aware that any sudden movement could trigger chaos. But the ex-military men's panic had created a controlled window. She had anticipated hesitation, predicted fear, and now was ready to convert it into decisive action. Every detail, from the placement of crates to the men's gestures, was mapped in her mind. The tattoo had revealed her identity, but it had also revealed theirs, their overconfidence, their vulnerability, and the thin line between control and disaster. She watched as the men hurriedly assessed the surrounding area, noting possible escape routes, exits, and hazards. Their whispered instructions became more urgent, less coordinated. Helena's calm, commanding presence dominated the scene without a word. She had shifted from observer to controller, a pivot point around which the night now revolved. The crates of weapons remained visible, but the men's confidence in their security had crumbled. One glance at her, and they understood that their meticulously planned operation was in jeopardy. Finally, the taller man, clearly the leader, raised his hand slightly, a silent gesture of temporary surrender. He studied her, calculating, realizing that confrontation at this moment could be disastrous. Helena maintained her stance, allowing a small nod that indicated she would act if necessary, but restraint and control were her greatest tools. The night had turned. The ex-military men had realized the truth. She was not merely an outsider. She was a special forces operative, capable, lethal, and entirely aware. And in that realization, panic rippled through them. They knew that their shipment, their carefully laid plans, and their personal safety were now vulnerable. Helena had turned a small, seemingly innocuous moment, a glimpse of a tattoo, into total operational dominance. She had won without striking a single blow against trained operatives, simply by the revelation of her identity and the calculated demonstration of skill. The ex-military men, now fully aware of Helena's true capabilities, scrambled in a chaotic blend of fear and instinctive calculation. Their earlier confidence evaporated, replaced by adrenaline-fueled panic. Helena had observed them long enough to anticipate every move before it happened. She stepped lightly from behind the crates, her boots silent against the dirt, her body a perfect blend of grace and lethal readiness. The moment the first man made a dash toward the alley, she followed without hesitation. Her movements were deliberate, silent, and controlled. Every step accounted for terrain, shadows, and potential obstacles. The night air carried their rapid footfalls, the sharp clatter of metal crates being shifted, and muffled curses. Helena's breath remained steady, her eyes locked on the fleeing men. She didn't need to run recklessly. She only needed to stay within striking distance and let their panic guide her actions. Every instinct told her that speed and precision would be more effective than brute force. Behind them, Corporal Briggs stumbled after Helena, his drunken state making him both irrelevant and dangerously unpredictable. He shouted something incoherent, calling attention to himself, but Helena ignored him. The ex-military men, distracted by their own fear and now aware of a second observer, shifted course, weaving through alleyways and ducking behind buildings. Helena's mind calculated every turn, memorizing the streets, alleys, and obstacles. She noted escape routes for the men, potential traps, and areas where they were most exposed. The taller man, clearly the leader, glanced over his shoulder and realized too late that Helena was not just following. She was predicting every movement, anticipating every turn. His breath came in short gasps, panic flickering across his sharp features. He shouted orders to his companions, attempting to regain control, but his voice carried only urgency, not authority. Helena kept her pace measured, silent, watching as the group's coordination began to unravel. The crates of weapons they had discussed earlier were no longer the focus. Their immediate priority was survival. Helena's eyes caught subtle cues, a man tensing as he rounded a corner, another leaning slightly forward as if calculating the next obstacle. Each small action revealed intent and exposed vulnerability. She moved closer, carefully closing the distance without revealing the full extent of her speed or power. One slip, one misstep, and they could vanish into the shadows, but Helena's calm assessment allowed her to anticipate and counter their every move. A narrow alley forced the men to slow, one stepping onto loose gravel that slipped beneath his boots. Helena seized the moment, sprinting with precise acceleration, closing the distance in seconds. The leader glanced back, eyes widening in disbelief. "She's faster than," he started, but his words were cut short by Helena's sudden appearance at the alley's end, her shadow falling across the path like a wall. The men faltered, unsure which way to turn. Briggs, now lagging behind and muttering confused apologies, stumbled into a stack of barrels, drawing Helena's brief attention. She pivoted, ensuring he remained unharmed while maintaining focus on the fleeing suspects. Her efficiency was uncanny, one eye on the Marines, one on the ex-military men, mind cataloging movements, exits, and potential hazards simultaneously. Every second brought the chase closer to its decisive moment. The leader made a desperate move, attempting to vault over a wooden fence separating two backyards. Helena anticipated the trajectory perfectly. She stepped lightly, grabbed his wrist mid-leap, and redirected his momentum downward, forcing him to crash onto the dirt below. He rolled instinctively, trying to regain balance, but Helena was already on him, her training evident in the precision of her movements. No unnecessary force, no wasted energy, every action had purpose. The remaining two men slowed, watching the encounter with tense calculation. Fear had replaced confidence entirely. Helena did not hesitate. She used a quick, controlled step to close the distance, blocking their retreat path and leaving them no choice but to surrender or attempt a risky, exposed escape. Their panic was palpable, their whispered coordination breaking down. Helena's calm authority dominated the moment, making her presence the single controlling force in the alley. Briggs finally reached the scene, gasping and tripping over his own boots. He stopped at the edge, eyes wide, finally understanding fully that the woman before him, Helena Ward, was a force beyond his comprehension. He stayed back, muted and irrelevant, witnessing firsthand the precision, power, and control of someone he had once foolishly shoved. The scene before him was no longer a mere chase. It was a lesson in skill, patience, and lethal efficiency. The leader attempted one last evasive maneuver, diving toward a side alley. Helena anticipated the move, sidestepped slightly, and blocked the path, her presence physically asserting control without a single word. The remaining men hesitated, their coordination unraveling completely. Helena's calm dominance and unyielding gaze forced them into submission. They stopped, trapped by their fear, uncertainty, and her unwavering presence. Every instinctive reaction they had rehearsed for years failed against someone who moved with both predictability and unpredictability simultaneously. Helena's voice finally cut through the tension, soft but commanding. "Step back, now." The men froze, recognition of their situation dawning fully. She had given them a choice, cooperation over confrontation, and the calculus was clear. Resistance would fail, compliance was their only viable option. They glanced at one another, silently weighing options, their fear now tempered by realization. Helena's reputation, confirmed by the earlier tattoo revelation and her flawless chase, had reached a critical peak of dominance. Slowly, carefully, they raised their hands, signaling surrender. Helena kept her stance firm, her eyes never leaving them, nodding every micro-expression, every subtle twitch, every unspoken intention. The chase had ended, but control remained entirely in her hands. The crates of weapons, the intelligence she had gathered, and the ex-military men's operational plans were all now vulnerable to her intervention. She had turned a chaotic pursuit into a controlled resolution, her skills leaving no room for doubt. Briggs, still on the sidelines, muttered an awed, hushed, She's incredible." Helena allowed herself a brief glance at him, her expression neutral, but her mind catalogued the moment. She had converted distraction into opportunity, aggression into compliance, and panic into tactical advantage. The men in front of her now fully understood the consequences of misjudging someone like Helena Ward. The night was far from over, but the alley, the crates, and the subdued ex-military men now lay entirely within her control. Helena's presence, skill, and calculated patience had transformed the chaotic chase into a decisive victory. Every movement, every glance, every careful step had been orchestrated, resulting in a scene where power, skill, and intelligence dictated the outcome, leaving Helena Ward undeniably in command. The alley was silent now, the ex-military men standing still, hands raised, fully aware that any sudden movement could provoke immediate retaliation. Helena Ward's calm dominance radiated across the confined space. Every muscle in her body remained poised, alert yet composed, as if she had been frozen in a moment of perfect control. The crates of weapons, now fully within her line of sight, were secured, and the men had no way to act without exposing themselves further. She stepped forward, her boots soundless against the gravel, the pale moonlight catching the glint of metal at her hip. Helena's eyes scanned the men, noting their shifting expressions, fear, respect, and reluctant acknowledgement. She allowed her gaze to linger just long enough to assert authority, yet without provoking panic that could cause rash decisions. Every step she took was calculated to maintain dominance while preparing for the extraction of intelligence. Briggs, still leaning against a wall some distance away, had gone from awe to cautious fascination. He had witnessed the entirety of Helena's skill, the shove in the saloon, her precise takedown of him, the chase through the town, and now her seamless command of the situation. His mouth opened, and for a moment he tried to form words. Helena's eyes flicked briefly toward him, a subtle nod signaling both acknowledgement and instruction. Stay back, observe, and learn. The leader of the ex-military group swallowed hard, clearly calculating his dwindling options. Helena, sensing his hesitation, moved smoothly toward the crates. "The shipment," she said, her voice low and controlled, "will stay here. Any attempt to retrieve it without following my instructions will end badly for all of you." Her words carried weight far beyond their sound. Each syllable was deliberate, emphasizing the consequences of disobedience while maintaining her professional restraint. The man's companions shifted nervously, exchanging glances that betrayed both fear and reluctant compliance. Helena allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. The night had been a test, and now the results were unmistakable. Control was hers. She had turned potential chaos into precision, uncertainty into order, and threat into obedience, all without drawing a single shot. The tattoo, the shove, the chase, they had all been elements of a plan she had never fully revealed. Helena crouched briefly to inspect the crates, noting serial numbers, labels, and markings that would be crucial for intelligence reporting. Her mind cataloged each detail, creating a mental map of the operation, the network involved, and potential vulnerabilities for law enforcement or military intervention. The ex-military men remained still, their body language screaming caution, yet they had no room to maneuver. Helena had transformed observation into leverage, patience into control, and timing into tactical advantage. A soft wind rustled through the alley, carrying with it the distant sounds of the town at night, the faint bark of a dog, the occasional creak of a sign swinging in the breeze, the subtle hum of distant traffic. Helena's senses remained attuned to every element, her peripheral vision catching the slightest movements of the men. One made a subtle step forward, testing her reaction. Helena responded instantly with a slight shift in posture, a micro-expression of readiness that was enough to freeze him in place. Briggs finally spoke, his voice low and uncertain. I had no idea." Helena glanced at him briefly, allowing a small nod. Words were unnecessary, her actions had spoken far louder. The Marine's earlier shove had inadvertently started a chain of events that revealed her skills, enforced her authority, and neutralized a potential threat. He had witnessed firsthand what she was capable of, and the lesson had been delivered without ambiguity. Helena addressed the ex-military leader directly, her voice firm yet professional. "You will remain here. Any communication, movement, or attempt to retrieve the shipment without my supervision will result in immediate intervention. Do you understand? The man's jaw tightened, then he nodded sharply. The others followed suit, their movements precise and deliberate. Compliance had been achieved not through fear alone, but through skill, reputation, and controlled demonstration. Helena had turned potential confrontation into strategic dominance. With the men secured and the crates accounted for, Helena signaled for extraction. She retrieved a small communication device from her jacket, discreetly sending encrypted updates to her command. Each detail of the operation, the shipment location, the identities of the ex-military men, and the paths taken during the chase, was transmitted with clarity and precision. Helena had ensured that all intelligence gathered would be actionable, leaving nothing to chance. The night had been dangerous, unpredictable, and tense, but she had navigated every hazard with flawless professionalism. Helena's eyes swept the alley one final time, cataloging exits, potential witnesses, and environmental factors. Every element had been controlled, every risk mitigated, every threat neutralized. The ex-military men remained subdued, aware of the authority that had been exercised over them. Helena's presence, her skill, and the calculated use of both observation and action had transformed a chaotic night into a precise, successful operation. Briggs, still standing awkwardly at the edge of the scene, muttered under his breath, She's unreal." Helena allowed herself a brief, almost imperceptible smile. She did not need to correct him. The display of skill, control, and tactical mastery had spoken volumes. His earlier shove had been inconsequential in hindsight, a minor catalyst that set the stage for her decisive command. As she moved away from the crates, signaling the men to remain in place until authorities arrived, Helena remained vigilant, alert to the faintest movement or sound. Her mission was complete, but she knew the consequences of any lapse in attention. Every step, every glance, every subtle gesture had to maintain the illusion of calm while preserving control over a volatile situation. She had succeeded not just through skill, but through patience, observation, and strategic foresight. Finally, the ex-military men were escorted, the shipment secured, and Helena allowed herself to step back into the shadows. The town remained unaware of the events that had unfolded behind closed doors in alleyways and under moonlight. She had neutralized a dangerous operation, maintained absolute control, and left no trace of her presence beyond the intelligence she had gathered. The night was silent, the threat contained, and Helena Ward's mission complete. As she disappeared into the darkness, her figure melding with the shadows, the echoes of the night remained, the shuffle of feet, the whispered panic, the silent acknowledgement of a force beyond comprehension. Helena Ward had turned chaos into precision, confrontation into compliance, and danger into intelligence. The Marine who had shoved her in a saloon had unknowingly ignited a chain of events that would be remembered, not by those in the town, but by the operatives who had underestimated her skill, patience, and lethal precision. The streets of Calhoun Ridge returned to their quiet rhythm, the night itself oblivious to the drama that had unfolded. Helena vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of controlled chaos, secured intelligence, and subdued adversaries. Her mission was complete, her presence was decisive, and the legend of the woman who moved like a shadow, struck like lightning, and commanded without words would remain silently in the minds of those who had witnessed her skill firsthand.